Hi, I'm Veronica. I'm a somatic teacher and therapist, and this is the third part of my mini series where I'm showing you how you could move with more ease and how you could find the fluidity and ease in your body. And today we're gonna look at the midline and your center, your core. But by the core, I don't really mean your abdominal muscles or anything like that, but rather your center of gravity and that point somewhere in your lower belly from which you could initiate a movement so that it becomes far more stable and it requires less effort. And just as we did last week, I'm going to show it to you in various relations to the ground and to the space around you, starting lying down. So you can make your way down and take a moment to find the most comfortable position. And eventually landing in a constructive rest with the knees bent and feet on the mat. Make any little adjustments you need to make to settle here. And actually, if there was a possibility of reaching out with the legs, making them long and coming more into an X shape, you could explore that too. If it's too much for the lower back, if that doesn't feel comfortable, that's fine to stay with the knees bent. So choose one of those. And the first thing we're going to look at is the breath, because the breath really has that kind of pulsating quality of expansion and retraction. And that's the same, pretty much the same kind of curling and uncurling movement, reaching from the center outward and back in, that we're going to replicate later on. So the first thing is simply to observe what naturally occurs, how the breath expands your body. So the breath itself is enough to move your bones. And if you start paying really close attention to it, you might start noticing those movements of the bones, not only your ribs, but entire shoulder girdle, the pelvic girdle as well. So maybe if you're with the knees bent, it might be easier to feel that little bit of a tilt, the expansion that makes maybe almost your pelvis to widen and your legs kind of come out and then everything sort of comes in. So it's almost like a natural continuation of this movement. Yes, so you don't really even need to do anything extra. You just follow up. What happens is a response to the breath. There's that natural expansion, reaching out, widening, broadening with the inhale and gathering in, returning on the exhale. And if you catch that rhythm and stay on its wave, there's much less to do. While if you tried to go kind of against it, it would be double effort, at least double effort. So let's say if you were in the X shape, you might feel that it doesn't really take much to reach out a little bit more with all limbs when you inhale. And then for it all to kind of shrink back towards the center on the exhale. You might even decide for yourself, where is that center for you? Which part of the belly, where in your torso would be that center? And regardless of which position you chose to begin with, you can think of following that impulse and kind of curling in when you exhale. And slowly undoing it on the inhale. You can see that my mat is all folding just because it's a sticky mat. So actually it would even work better if you got rid of the mat and were in the carpet or on the blanket. And if the slide would be way easier and kind of gathering in and expanding. And you know that you're kind of overdoing it if your limbs reach so far away from the center that you lost the connection with it. And then it's not that much more effort to return. So there is an expansion, but not to the point where you lose the connection with the midline, with the core of you. And that is really the key. You could do the same movement when you're lying on the back. You could add to it rolling to the side. And the important thing is here that you're not really kind of trying to reach with your limbs. That's when the rigidness happens. That's when you're kind of putting an extra effort. When you start from the end, here you start from the middle. It's like everything kind of getting closer towards the center. It wraps around that center. And again, it's from the center that you gradually open. And that makes this movement far more manageable, far easier than if you try to think, oh, now how to do that? Yeah, I have to lift my arm and leg, and what goes next? Yeah, you don't really need to worry about them. They will follow. They wrap around, they're smooth, they're quite relaxed, and the movement follows. It's like radiation, right? It starts from the center and it radiates outward. That's how it will look like when you are lying down on the ground. And then let's just check it on in different positions. So let's say on all fours, and here you might want to have something underneath your knees to support you. So to begin with, find a place where you're equally supported with all four limbs, entire palms, entire lower legs. There's some sort of connection between the top of the head and the tail. And here as well, you have somewhere your center. So you could use that for a cat-cow, imagining that it's the middle of you that starts reaching upward, and then the rest of the body complies with it and follows that movement, which will mean that your tail and the head fall at the very end of it. And again, that's a kind of solar plexus area that is reaching down towards the floor, and that's what goes down first, and the rest only follows it. So it's like a string that moves from the center and it spreads out to the peripheries. And this is far more sustainable. You decide where you would like to take an inhale or an exhale. This is not really so important here. You can kind of work it out for yourself. where it feels more natural, where it feels more effortless. Okay? And if we want to add limbs to that, other limbs to that, yeah, you can think of that center somewhere in the belly. And you can think of kind of curling yourself into a ball. So that might include bringing one leg in, letting your head drop, rounding and curling all around that center. And now when you reach away, you don't start with the head, or you don't start with reaching your leg away. So it doesn't start from the foot or leg. It really starts from the center. This movement begins from the center, and then that leg becomes lighter when you move it back. There's a difference when you lift the leg starting from the middle of you, and that leg doesn't kind of lose connection because it's so tense or so much reaching away. It feels lighter when you move from the center rather than from the periphery, from your foot. And you can try it a few times. So there might be this total curl up if you tuck the toes under and reach with your hips towards the heels. You're really rounding yourself, making yourself small. And then there's the process of uncurling, moving from the midline outwards towards the foot. So here, as you can see, it's not really so much about reaching as far as you can or making yourself very tense. The body doesn't really need to be tense. It's only enough of that internal tension, tensegrity, for it to be so stable. But you don't need to put like a really massive effort into that. And of course, it's useful to try on the other side. And it would make sense, again, just as we were doing when lying down, to curl in and become small when you exhale, and to unfurl, reach from the center outward when you inhale. So you can even, just out of curiosity, try the same movement, reversing inhales and exhale, and see, does it really help you to inhale with that effort of lifting the leg, and exhale when you bring it all in. And of course, you could do that adding all limbs. So it could be exhale to curl it in, inhale to move away. And again, not by reaching your fingertips and toes and really rigidly tensing your limbs, keeping it kind of disconnected, but really following that one line, wave of movement from the midline outward. And that alone changes a lot. So you're not thinking of it as lifting your arm or leg. You're thinking of it as unfurling from the midline, from the center to the peripheries. So that's how it would look like when you're on all fours. And then again, you could easily do the same also when you are standing. Or even in this kind of typical yoga poses. So if you do yoga, you might find that this suddenly makes many of the poses much easier and lighter. So let's say if you are doing a downward dog, I'm gonna go for a short one because that one tends to be more stable. And again, you're not kind of so far away that you don't have that connection with the core. I prefer my down dog to be kind of shorter. I don't really care about my knees. But here, if we want to take the same principle, it could be coiling and uncoiling. But again, it's not like your leg reaching away, you kind of lifting that leg and pulling it up and trying to reach it as far as you can. That's not what it is. It's really one line of movement that travels from the midline outward through the leg to the foot. And that foot doesn't travel so far that you don't feel the connection with the core anymore. You could play with that if this is your sort of practice. If that feels like, oof, this is definitely not what I would like to try today. It's just an example, okay? And then we have a standing positions. So here you could do sort of exactly same kind of coiling and uncoiling, wrapping up into a ball and unfurling as we did when you were lying on the back. So if you were in X shape, before we were in an X shape lying on the back, here we can be in X shape in space, right? And there can be still that connectivity between somewhere in the middle of you and all the limbs, including extra limbs, which would be the tail and the top of the head. And then you could curl yourself and uncurl. You could even kind of do it into a sideways sort of movement when you make yourself into a ball and then unfurl from the midline outward. And then again, you curl yourself into a ball, bending the knees, bending the elbows, wrapping yourself around your own core, around your own center. And then unwrapping into that easeful, bouncy sort of X shape without any tensing, without any locking of the joints, without reaching to the maximum, yeah? And again, you could use the breath, expanding with the inhale and wrapping with the exhale. And once you know that base, you could use the same principle to come pretty much into any standing poses. So again, if you are familiar with this kind of typical hatha yoga, you might know all this kind of triangles and warriors. So any of that, you could come with the same principle. So you have that wide and really stable stance, never super narrow, on as if you're standing on a line, on a rope. You really want to stand as if you are standing on a railway tracks, one foot on one and one on the other. It's much more sustainable for your pelvis as well. So kind of more diagonal on the mat. And here you could begin with sort of rounded shape, curled up shape. And then it's as if gradually this movement travels and reaches all your limbs away. But again, it's without losing that connection to the core. So let's say it would be hip and tail reaching away, heels reaching away, toes reaching away, top of the head reaching away. And then if you want to add the arms, they're also reaching away, but again, from the middle outwards. And then you can curl back in, like a pulsation. Reach away and curl back in. And that reaching is not super rigid. If you start locking and tensing up your limbs, it becomes much more effort. So it remains soft so that those parts can communicate with one another. Okay? So it's almost like it travels through the spine, opening it, and that center supports you in an almost effortless way. And obviously, you can try the same on the other side. curling and uncurling in all directions here. Curling and uncurling. And maybe even uncurling in other shapes. The same thing. Starting from the midline, moving outwards. It could take you in any shape, so long as you're kind of staying connected to that center of you. You could stay for a moment in that big expansive X shape. And then release it. Maybe even spend some time with your hands over the lower belly, somewhere below the navel, above the pubic bone. You could use this point when you're going down, connection with the peripheries, with your feet, but also connection with that middle of you as you make your way down. So that could take you into a curl, maybe even a complete curl. And then it's uncurling without losing that connection with that point of reference, with what helps you to find yourself in space, with the center of the gravity. So I hope you enjoyed that little exploration and that you're gonna keep on playing and experimenting with this kind of reaching away, but always from the midline outward without going too far or too much. And yes, please let me know if it changed the way you move or do any sports or physical practice. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you'd like to know more about how you could include this kind of easeful movement and start really talking with your body, listening to it, and using that natural intelligence of the body so that you can get rid of unnecessary tension and find the ease that perhaps you were missing for quite a while, I warmly invite you to join my newsletter. I send a newsletter with kindness also every Monday, and I share more of my knowledge so that you can deal better with the chronic pain, chronic stress, anxiety, and more. Thank you.